A story we agree to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie. But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder. Many who try to climb it fail, and never get to try again. The fall breaks them. And some are given a chance to climb, but they refuse. They cling to the realm, or the gods, or love. Illusions. Only the ladder is real. The climb is all there is.
We're not taking that ladder of chaos. More like going down into the hole of chaos. Although it might be the same thing. Let us find out. Because deeper we go into that rabbit hole, my beloved true seekers. Taken the red pill, stood next to the laughing Jesus for a moment to spell. Elevated into the dream of Vishnu next to Lord Krishna after he got perforated in the foot by an arrow. And crawl slowly out of Plato's cave into the sunlight of burning self-realization. Deeper we go with Inanna, Persephone, Alice, and Sophia into the vaginal canals of the universe, going through birth pangs, as St. Paul claimed. Into the inner sanctums of Gnosis and the outer rectums of reality. Deeper we go.
Maybe it's true. Maybe God threw the dice once too often. Maybe he let us all down.
Welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Broadcast at the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West. Always broadcast through the God above God that can. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority of anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. Our purpose is what listener Leslie Richardson told me recently, and that is, if you think you've been given life to feed cemeteries with dead bodies, you are mistaken. Or as John Lennon said, maybe in a lighter tone, during a Playboy interview, it seems to me the only true Christians were the Gnostics, who believed in self-knowledge. That is, becoming Christ themselves, reaching the Christ within. The light is the truth. Turn on the light. All the better to see you with, my dear.
You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up.
Only the true dope here, of your divine heritage, and only for those who are truly ready to face it, regardless of how difficult it may be. For example, recent studies, as reported in such varied publications as The Guardian and Disinformation, proffer research that proffers how meditation has been corrupted by New Agers, and it's actually causing damage to individuals. Then again, maybe not, and it's the New Age promotion in the wrong context that is causing the damage.
You're messing with my Zen thing, man.
As the Disinformation article said, quote, Buddhist meditation was designed not to make us happier, but to radically change our self and perception of the world. Given this, it is perhaps not surprising that some will experience negative effects, such as dissociation, anxiety, and depression. It's the same with Gnosis. The red pill was never meant to be a, quote, good thing. It's meant to be a liberating thing. But freedom has a price, and it usually means the Ragnarok of your identity and former life as an obedient simian. as you see into the reality beyond reality. Deeper we go.
You're not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. You're not your fucking khakis.
I am Abraxas, an unfinished god, as Steve D explained in our episode on Gnosticism and Chaos Magic. For you and I are creating him together as we discover him together, and vice versa, as we enter a new age of art and the destruction of boredom. I come to you in my meat machine incarnation of Miguel Connor, broadcasting from the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago, patiently waiting for the beginning of the world and the Twin Peaks reboot. I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, that smell of colitas rising up through the air. Let's continue finishing Abraxas together, and let's continue going deeper.
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share. Undimmed by time, unbound by death.
On this mid-June, the year of our Demiurge 2015, we have the Yolk Sototh pleasure of being joined by Scott R. Jones. He's a writer, poet, spoken word performer, mostly unintentional comedian, and naturalized sorcerer. His fiction and poetry has been published in Broken City Mag, Innsmouth Magazine, and Cthulhu Haiku 2. He is the author of Soft from All the Blood, The Ecdyasias, and When the Stars Are Right, which we will be focusing on this eternal now. When the Stars Are Right is an excellent book that blew my spiritual uterus away. And, my beloved True Seekers, it has a great introduction by Jordan Stratford. For more information on Scott and his blasphemies, please visit MartianMigrainePress.com. That is MartianMigrainePress.com.
Your own father said that artists use lies to tell the truth.
Unless you have Irish or Portuguese blood in your veins, you probably know we'll be discussing Lovecraft and the Cthulhu Mythos, but from a unique esoteric approach and perspective. And we will also procure some of its Gnostic and occult themes. You won't find a better expert on the Cthulhu Mythos outside of Robert Price and Scott. And you would be hard-pressed to find a better writer outside of Clive Barker when it comes to the edgy. It's a long overdue show, especially since I was profoundly affected by such books as The Dunwich Horror, At the Mountains of Madness, or The Call of Cthulhu early in my life. I certainly love these folks in the old deities and demigods, including the great drawings by Errol Otis.
The Necronomicon. I've got to get to the library right away.
Like I said, Aeon by Gnostic Radio is just as dangerous to mundane reality as the great old ones returning. Or to the Archons that are already here ruling this photoshopped reality.
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
Please support Aeon by Gnostic Radio in any way you can. A few shekels here and there, or a sacrifice to Azathoth and his flute players. Your continued support keeps this Red Pill cafeteria going and allows alternative lords of deconstruction like Scott and Needed Voice. Much appreciation to you Ink and the Storytellers who support this Hobbit podcast on a weekly basis. I should mention that I am an Amazon.com affiliate, so any books you order from the GodAboveGod.com grant me a kickback. In fact, if you order anything, whether it's clothes, appliances, or sex toys, click through my site first, and I will get a kickback from that as well. even if you don't order anything that's actually advertised on the site. Let's continue growing this eternal soundtrack of the counterculture. We're going to build vast futures of light here at the virtual Alexandria for you, and do so many wonders together. I just know it. I just know it.
And the attitude is not to withdraw from the world when you realize how horrible it is, but to realize that this horror is simply the foreground of a wonder. And come back and participate in it.
Let me now quote author Phil Rockstro, because it's relevant to this introduction on rabbit holes and chaos and ego-nuking truths and terror that is opening your third eye. It goes, quote, to paraphrase Rilke, all human beings have a letter written inside their heart, and if you don't live the life your heart yearns to live, you won't be allowed to read this letter before you die. Thus, one might infer, there exists across the land dead letter offices, vast and cavernous, where our mail waits, unopened and unread. Empires rise and fall, but imagination remains, flowing through time and place, bearing all things to the sea and back again, perpetually returning, bringing new life to the dry, dead land, slaking our thirst, cleansing our wounds, delivering us to strength to make and remake the world anew, and, at day's end, lulling us to restful sleep to the timeless cadence of its ceaseless currents. Just like Cthulhu, as you will soon find.
Everything is backwards now. Like out there is the true world, and in here is the dream.
And to balance this, I'll directly quote Lovecraft on what exemplifies the perils and opportunities of gnosis, meditation, finding that lost meal of your heart, or any pursuits that lifts us up to those suns of potential, even at the cost of what we thought we were and what reality was. Here it goes. Quote, the sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piercing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and our frightful position the reign, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. That hole of chaos, or that rabbit hole we go deeper, led us to the interview with Scott. Write your own gospel and live your own myth.
Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the Book of the Dead.
Land of light, the army of darkness shall sweep down. They are gathered like a horde of avengers. Life within life, the power that summons. Come back, old ones, princes of darkness, and repossess the earth.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Scott R. Jones to discuss his book, When the Stars Are Right, Towards an Authentic Arlean Spirituality and Other Heretical Sundries. How you doing today, Scott?
Very good, Miguel. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So why don't we start with in the beginning a bit? Could you tell us briefly about your background and how you became a writer?
Oh, that's a loaded one, isn't it?
It always is.
How I became a writer. I started reading, I guess. That's certainly so. I guess we can trace that back to age 4. Sure, why not? It's the word gets in you early, I guess, if it finds if it finds a place to roost, and it did with me. So yeah, I've been writing since I was wee. Obviously encouraged by reading and writing parents as well. So yeah, but as for actually sitting down and trying to make a real go at it, I'd say within the last 10 years. So I guess you could say I'm a late bloomer in that respect. Actually writing stuff that's that can be read, that's tolerable to be read.
Well, it was Fitzgerald who said that you gotta write 1 million words before you find your voice. So
yeah,
that's what you've been doing, huh?
Yeah, I've been working on it. it's I wouldn't say I've found it yet, but it is coming together. At least so far as my readers are telling me. It's like, hey, love your voice. It's like, okay, yes. Don't know what you're talking about, but let's run with that. Okay.
Oh, I can relate.
When I figure it out, you'll figure it out, I tell them.
Yeah, you're taking people on a journey. So beyond, obviously, Lovecraft, who are some of your inspirations, both artistic or occult or really anything?
Well, obviously, as you say, Lovecraft's kind of top of the pile there. But honestly, more Lovecraft for his ideas and less so for his actual style, as can be evidenced by the book. By most of my efforts, where we try to take Lovecraft's concepts and move them into more interesting areas, things he probably would cringe at, but nevertheless the information's there to be played with and riffed on. As far as other inspirations, I like Jorge Luis Borges. I like him quite a lot. I read a lot of Cormac McCarthy for fiction. Been reading Kelly Link recently, a short story writer out of Northampton. She's really amazing. You never know what she's going to do. She leaves you quite unsettled, which has been fun for me. I like that with my fiction. I'd rather not be, I'd rather not be comfortable. I'm sitting down to read. I don't want to be comfortable. I'm physically comfortable. I wish to be psychically agitated when I read. So anything that does that, obviously. So I tend towards the fringy stuff. As far as inspirations go, occult or belief wise, when I was younger, I was a huge Robert Anton Wilson fanatic, and that tends to sort of, I don't want to say lock you in, because it's not really about locking in, but it tends to free you up. I enjoy Kenneth Grant's work. I enjoy the Scottish comics wunderkind Grant Morrison. I love his Invisibles series, which is about as Gnostic as you're ever going to get within the pages of a comic book.
Indeed.
Yeah. Let's see. That's all top of mind. There's more. I have layers, and there's strata of folks who've inspired me. Austin Osman Spare, Alphabet of Desire, that whole process, which was highly personal to him, and I think it almost would work best if you are Austin Osman Spare, but yeah.
Yeah, with the groups such as McCarthy, Jorge Luis Borges, Morrison, Ra. Yeah, you're definitely already sort of doomed to be into Gnosticism, it seems.
Yeah.
And it is interesting when you're talking about Lovecraft and his writing style. And as you write in his book, the man really hated everything, but he was certainly in love with the adjective and the adverb. Don't you agree?
I do, to a certain extent. I mean, a lot of the current scholarly thinking is, especially those who are, definitely making their living off Lovecraft scholarship, they would tend to not agree with you that it is, Lovecraft's style was very much his own, and those who complain of more adjectives that are needed, just aren't really grokking him. I kind of agree on both sides of that question regarding Lovecraft. Is yes, it is thick stuff. By all means, it's it's weighted prose. There's a lot going on in there, but it works for him somehow. If it didn't work, we wouldn't still be reading him. But it is kind of an acquired taste for sure.
So, Scott, in When the Stars Are Right, you detail an experience that 6 years later brought you to Lovecraft and also Arlean spirituality. Could you tell the listener about it?
Yeah, I can go into some detail about that. Obviously, I'm not going to completely, put too many spoilers on it. Oh, yeah, where to begin with that? It's all, still incredibly fresh, in my mind. Although it's nearly, what are we looking at here? It's nearly 20 years ago now. So I was in my early teens. I mentioned my reading and writing parents earlier, and I basically all my family are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was too at the time, which made this experience quite disorienting and uncomfortable for me when it went down. Basically, I had a dream visitation over the course of several nights, an interaction with something on the other side of that experience. The dream itself would progress from the beginning. Obviously, I would arise into the dream. I would arise in such a way that there was no preamble. There was none of that usual dreamy weirdness that would just lead you to the start point of the actual event. I showed up. I would just awaken to consciousness within the dream state and had that wonderful sort of, which I've since been able to recognize, that wonderful quality of lucidity, of that. Some dreams, of course, they're dreams. Other dreams have that more real than real feeling. You just wake up thinking, well, I've woken up into regular life, which is quite dreamy in comparison to where I just was. This was one of those, and certainly had many symbolic elements in it. Again, I won't go into details and let the reader get those in the book itself. But basically, the dream would progress from a start point to, I guess you could say, the penultimate point or item in the dream. And at that point, for over the course of 6 evenings, I would wake. I would wake before it really climaxed. Before things really took off. There was always the implication that, I had, just pulled myself out of the dream before the message was going to be delivered. The message delivery was imminent, and I would basically pop out. So, first night was like, well, that was certainly strange. Second night, of course, being a young JW boy, one started to get worried. By the fourth night, I was thoroughly spooked. And then, nights 5 and 6, it began to take on, such import for me that I decided after the 6th time this happened, and this is all in a row, you have to understand. It's not, it was very biblical after a fashion, very prophetic. Here I was receiving this dream night after night after night. I haven't had many repeating dreams since, and certainly not to that extent. I'm told that they're rare. So basically on the 6th, after the 6th time, for some reason, I decided, my young 14-year-old self decided, it would be a great idea. I should write this thing down. People do that, right? They have dream journals. I should write this down. Never minding the fact that here was an experience that had so indelibly gouged its way into my life that there was no way. Even now, thinking back on it, it's like it happened last week. It's completely fresh. It's it's maintained. I can still smell. I can still smell the sand and the ozone coming off the ocean and what have you. So, but nevertheless, at the time, it seemed completely reasonable. I should get a pad of paper. I should write this thing down the next time it happens, if it happens. So that's what I did. I got a little notepad, and I got a pen, and I got a second pen in case the first pen ran out. I got a pencil in case both ran out. just this ridiculous amount of, completely useless preparation, done almost automatically, unconsciously. Let's just do this thing. So night 7 rolls around, and sure enough, again, I enter into that experience, and it progresses and it progresses and it progresses, and then it gets to the point where previously I had, basically popped out of the dream. Past that point, message received, message delivered, message received. I awoke, wrote it down, still half asleep, still dreaming, and filled 3 pages or so with what I thought were the contents of the dream, and fell back asleep, exhausted. Woke up the next morning to check out what I'd written down, and it's not English. It's not anything I have had seen up to that point. It's not anything I've seen since. Nevertheless, it has, because it's continued to happen. Once that contact was made, it's continued to happen off and on. There were very intense periods when I was, single and nothing better to do. when it was something of an odd party trick I would do. But basically, basically it was this this other thing, this expression of otherness. And when I was involved with Crowleyan groups in other cities in Canada and what have you, people would get quite excited about this material and its transmissions and what have you. I've since basically come to the conclusion that although I could continue to dig and sort it out, I think the message, to paraphrase McLuhan, basically we're looking at, the medium is the message. It's just this bizarre channeled material. So this occurred, and my 14-year-old self immediately took this thing and went out to the back alley and threw it in a can and burned it.
Oh wow!
But that hasn't stopped it. That hasn't stopped it. It continues. It continues to come through, and it's been part of my spiritual practice. It's been part of my my meditative practice. Really, just opening myself up to this material, wherever it comes from. Is it the secrets of the universe? Is it a laundry list? Is it who knows?
Delusion. It's the old Philip K. Dick. What were these rays real or not? What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. And much later on, even much after I discovered Lovecraft, discovering Philip K. Dick was like, okay, well now I can relax a little.
You're not alone.
This clearly is a thing that happens to humans occasionally. Let's run with it.
Well, why don't we talk about Arlean spirituality? Maybe we can begin with the idea of Black Gnosis. And
the Black Gnosis. Mm-hmm. Keeping it real, yeah. Is basically what we're running with. Black Gnosis is essentially how to parse this one. I basically envisioned it as entering into sort of a gleeful nihilism, entering into madness in such a way that basically when all is madness, there is no madness. Oftentimes especially in Western thought and Western society, we constantly love that binary, sane, insane. There's no spectrum. It's a 1 or it's a 0. And in Lovecraft's fiction, you see this a lot. You see his characters, his narrators, his protagonists are often men of science, scholarly men. Almost always entirely men. There's very little female wisdom anywhere in Lovecraft, which that's another book entirely. But basically, what you see is you find these men of so-called knowledge, or at least men of Apollonian knowledge, scientific men, coming up against evidence that all that they know is wrong. It's the old fire sign theater thing. Everything you know is wrong, or at least deeply, deeply flawed, and certainly not cognizant of the whole picture. It's little people coming into contact with the bigger universe, and upon coming into that contact, basically losing their minds. those are the options in if you're a Lovecraftian hero, if you're a Lovecraftian protagonist, is death or madness, and it's hard to say which is worse. Certainly there are things worse than death in Lovecraft's worldview. So basically, the Black Gnosis is this awareness, this correlating of the contents, which is one of Lovecraft's more famous quotes from his story, The Call of Cthulhu, where mankind will eventually correlate his contents, or basically, gather enough knowledge that the truth will be revealed, and it will be too much. The deadly light of knowledge will smash down upon human society, and then we will flee into the peace and safety of a new dark age. This was his cheery vision.
I love it.
It's like, and you can clearly see that this is Lovecraft's great fear. Although he did love science, he was an avowed atheist and rationalist. Nevertheless, these black elements do rise up. It was something he was genuinely afeared of. But for me, in terms of what that means for Relayan spirituality, it's like, well, is that the only option? Can one enter into a state of basically divine madness, and come out the other side with a deeper appreciation of your place within the system of things, however appalling that might be, what's so awful about madness anyways, I guess.
Doesn't remind me of the great old ones, or the end game certainly reminds me throughout history of people who are seeking such other gods as Abraxas or Baphomet or Dionysus. That's what we want, to go beyond all boundaries.
Exactly. It's a thing that we do. It's a thing that we need to do. And in terms of what that means for Relayan spirituality and what I envision as its practice, it's we see a lot of. I think we're just crumbling under the weight of our denial as a society. As people. As to what our nature is and what we are capable of. By obscuring our true nature. From others, from ourselves, by not owning up to this. This sort of insane aspect of our existence. We're really sort of limiting our action in the world. I think we're seeing a lot of this. There's a lot of frustration. Against those sort of, I don't know what you would call it, regressive elements, reptilian elements, I guess you could say almost. Where it's like let's not go forward. Let's retreat to the peace and safety of a new dark age. It was better back then. This sort of deadly nostalgia, almost. So the Black Gnosis is basically, choosing to foster these thoughts. I guess giving them a place to flesh themselves out, and seeing where they fit with who we are as people, as entities. Embracing the other in a profound way, and realizing it to be ourselves.
So let's keep talking about the great old ones and what they represent in Arlean spirituality. As you write, they are not monsters, but more like, quote, principles of being. Why don't we start with the Big C himself, as you call him, Cthulhu, who seems to be a sort of Gnostic revealer, or Logos, or Morpheus in the Matrix, or even our own inner Christ in a sense. Am I often saying this, Scott?
I don't think so. It's as far as the correlation with Christ, I've had a few people in reviewing the book get let's just say they're a little cheesed off. They're like, this has nothing to do with Christ. Why would you even make these correlations? I'm making the correlations because they're there. Cthulhu is, he's interesting in terms of, all the gods and eldritch beasties that old Howard, trotted out for our amusement. most of them have this amorphous quality. They are all, shapeless, shapeless things, congeries of slime and bubbles and froth, and they seep out from the the wrong angles of time and space, and they're just generally protoplasmic, and it's icky stuff. Most of his gods are like that, until you get to Cthulhu, who has become, not coincidentally, sort of like the icon. I write in the foreword that basically, the tentacle has become, the visual sign in the 21st century of creeping evil. We see it we're seeing it everywhere, in film and in books. So, he's really sort of come into his own, Lovecraft, in these first decades of the 21st century. But Cthulhu is, he's the most humanoid. We're basically in the story, the Call of, I have you read, obviously you and your readers have likely read it. Basically, you have a very sort of anthropomorphic expression here. He's the high priest of the great old ones. He holds this position within the pantheon. He's basically got 2 arms, 2 legs, a trunk, a head. It's cephalopodic and dragon-like.
He's God. He's God become man.
Yeah, but he has. There's also the wings, the feelers sprouting from the front of the face, the general, the hugeness. And there's a wonderful line in the Call of Cthulhu where they're describing, Cthulhu has risen finally in the third part, briefly, and a mountain walked or stumbled is the line. But very totemic. Very sort of expressive of, basically a symbolic expression. I grew up on the west coast of BC, so, I grew up with a lot of Pacific Coast Native American iconography, totems and what have you. So it has a resonance for me, in that here in Cthulhu we have sort of a vision of the deep past, but also, there's a link to the human form. So I see Cthulhu, he's also referenced as the Lord of Dreams. Here is the Lord of Dreams. He sleeps in an interstitial state in his corpse city of Rillier on the floor of the Pacific, where he was banished in the Elder Times. And, he sends out waves of, psychic connection to, all sentient things on the planet. And these breed nightmares, but they create art and poetry, and it's all dark and horrible poetry, of course. The recipients tend to not do well with the contact, but there is contact.
They go write television shows or something.
Yeah, exactly. They make horrible sculptures. They begin to make eldritch art and compose strange symphonies and what have you. Sounds to me like a fantastic time.
No kidding.
But yeah, in terms of being a revealer or a logos, he's basically this unconscious element. He resides beneath the waves. He opens up worlds. He opens up worlds to those who receive the information. But he also has, he has a John the Baptist figure in the lesser god of Dagon, which, curiously enough, Dagon was an actual deity in the Sumerian, and basically, in the Fertile Crescent there. Lovecraft basically swiped the name. Why did he do that? For a guy who was basically cobbling together, the names of great old ones, left, right, and center out of whole cloth, basically. Very curious, and Dagon, of course, in his original incarnation was a bringer of information, a harvest god. He taught writing and technology. He's basically, allied with, the very early Nephilim or Watchers from early Hebraic Gnostic thought, if I've got my sources correct.
He's the star. He's the savior. And let's look at some of the other gods. We saw Yog-Sothoth as sort of like a Zeus-like demiurge, horny skirt-chasing wanderer. What does it represent to you?
he does kind of get around. That's certainly one interpretation for sure. In Lovecraft's story, and I find it interesting. I keep coming back to Lovecraft's stories, and this is a small complaint I've heard in regards to the book is why are you pulling this out of fiction? I'm like, well, why not? There's and that's really my point in writing it, is that Lovecraft may have that may not have been his intention. It certainly has, it certainly is fiction. Nevertheless, there are, there's a resonance with spiritual thought through the ages. We can certainly pull down the details of these critters. He wrote about, and break them down into their archetypal, into their categories, and see where they fit. Which is not to say that they're all going to be slotted into neat categories. They're very messy, and dealing with them and working with them, in your practices is tricky. You're basically asking for an influx of chaotic stuff, but you can handle it.
Are there any other gods that you find fascinating for Arlean spirituality? Azathoth, Shub-Niggurath, or any of those? Or?
They all have, basically in the book I chose five to run with. There's more. There's absolutely more, and I may go into that in later books if it comes down to that. But in terms of the top five. We have Yog-Sothoth, who is known as the lurker at the threshold. He occupies an interesting space in that he's basically a gateways deity. He's the gate. He's the key to the gate. He's the opening of the gate. He's very much about opening doors. I sort of sometimes I've mapped him onto Papa Legba in Vaduan thought. So there's that. He's basically, and as you say, also a horny bastard. But they all are. I mean, this is we can't lay that all at Yog-Sothoth's door. They're everybody's quite down with the miscegenation. in Lovecraft's world, there's always that possibility that offspring are the way to go for these deities. It gives them more of a hold, in our reality. But yeah, so Yog-Sothoth is there. They're all basically, as you mentioned earlier, principles of being. And I think I had Jordan Stratford. Basically, he wrote the introduction for me, and he makes me sound far more intelligent than I am, which is nice.
It's a great introduction. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, he's a good fella. But basically, he broke them down into I think he called them ill-behaved compressions of ideal form. So basically, there's singularities of various things. So of Yog-Sothoth, you've got the singularity of being, and then of course there's Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, who's basically the messenger of the outer gods. He sort of has a Hermes aspect to him. But he's, concerned with, he's basically a singularity of meaning. Shub-Niggurath is, allied to Yog-Sothoth, and that, basically with Yog-Sothoth you have pure being. There's one of the classic couplets from the Necronomicon is, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. There is nothing that is not somehow partaking of Yog-Sothoth. He's very sort of primal in that sense. In his story through the gates of the Silver Key, which he wrote with a stone cold mystic, somebody named E. Hoffman Price, Edward Hoffman Price, I think was his name. So there's one of the few instances where Lovecraft wrote with another fella, but Hoffman Price was very you can tell which bits are him in the story, because he just goes into this wonderful Blavatskian stuff, which he introduces. And Yog-Sothoth is basically, all mystic sorcerers and, general spiritual weirdos are basically cross sections, little slices of the higher dimensional being that is Yog-Sothoth. So Yog-Sothoth is, again, pure being. Shub-Niggurath, though, is basically the manifestation of Yog-Sothoth in the physical world. Shub-Niggurath doesn't get a lot of play in Lovecraft's mythos. She's only indirectly referenced. But basically, with old Shubby there, you've got your fertility deity. So she's all about the flesh and the conquering of time and temporal restriction through basically through sex. Let's continue moving the information down through time and through the genes. So she's definitely one of the frothy, one of the frothy deities. And then, as I mentioned, Dagon is basically this John the Baptist figure who, prepares the way for Cthulhu. But Dagon is another interesting one because basically with him you have, he has a servitor race, basically amphibious frogmen from the depths, basically immortal, super intelligent, but thoroughly monstrous fish dudes. who often rise to the surface and make contract with isolated human populations so as to breed a fresh hybrid people, which will eventually take on the distinctive genetic taint, and then at a certain age return to the sea. So that's interesting in that you have basically contact. Which folks seek out. That's the interesting thing about Lovecraft's work is that his narrators and his point of view people are thoroughly horrified at everything that they're finding, and yet it's implied that there are also folks who seek this out. Why would you do this? Clearly, there's nothing we do as humans that doesn't usually have some benefit for us. We tend to be selfish in that regard. If it's actually harmful, we try not to do it. It's why we've survived as long as we have. So in terms of, why would someone, choose to make contact and, enter into contract with these things? Well, that begs the question, I guess.
And Scott, in my show, I always say, or I have my little tagline, write your own gospel and live your own myth. And it harkens back to the ethos of the Gnostics. You seem to say something very similar when you urge people to write their own Necronomicon. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's the Necronomicon is, it's a fascinating aspect of Lovecraft's work is that he basically put together, inserted into his fiction, a classic sort of black book, a forbidden tome. And at the time, it wasn't such a trope. It was fairly fresh. We're talking back in the 20s and 30s when Lovecraft was at his height of his fiction writing. And he gave it some legitimacy too, basically just to the casual reader, because he would regularly, you would enter into a scene in a story, and someone would have their occult library proudly displayed, or you would enter into a little out of the way bookshop and find a copy of the Necronomicon, but you'd find it cheek to jowl with Margaret Murray's The Witch Cult in Western Europe, which was an actual book. You would find it, you would find it next to the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, actual book. So he was smart. He was an interesting writer in that he basically, slipped it in there. So if you didn't know any better, and a lot do, even to this day, a lot do. You can still go on, Lovecraftian, Facebook groups and websites and what have you, and you still get newbies coming on saying, "Where can I get a copy?" And of course, we have, let's not forget the famed Necronomicon that was written by Simon, came out from Golden Goblin Press, which was out of New York City back in the mid '70s. It's known as the Simonomicon, published by Avon Books. You know, that little paperback thing that you see in every bookstore, right? 8 million copies in print. It's never been out of print. It's a giant publishing success story. And all it is basically, you know, cobbled together Sumerian rituals with some Lovecraftian backstory, you know, and it's funny.
It is, yeah.
But in terms of, you know, how that works for relay and spirituality, it's like, basically it's the creation of an astral book, which I think, you know, everyone should at least make an attempt at doing. And it needs to be such that it is actually an other thing. So many attempts at making a Necronomicon, basically it's a gag. You're making a prop for your role-playing games, or, you know, for your movie that you're making. So most Necronomicons that you see tend to be sort of like, oh, what's this, the Necronomicon? You know, it's very obvious. Very obviously is like, hey, that's the Necronomicon. It's sitting there on your coffee table, right? Which, you know, ideally it shouldn't be. If you're keeping the Necronomicon on your coffee table, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you might as well draw some Muhammad cartoons or something. You're in trouble.
Yeah, it just has that. Yeah, it has that feel of like, well, you know, it's a gag. To pen a true Necronomicon, you're basically, you know, as a relay and spirituality practitioner, you're creating almost an unbook, you know, an astral book. It has to be as near to actually incomprehensible as possible. It must partake of the outside. So if you're filling it with black letter Gothic Latin and pictures of tentacly beasties, you've missed the point. It should be an unconscious dream record. It should ideally, you know, almost be it should be asemic. You know, there should be meaning there, but it shouldn't. The meaning should basically be, you know, in the structure of the thing itself, not in the words. It's tricky. It's tricky to do and do right, but basically you're looking at, you know, it's a journal of your own inner workings, but written in such a way that it's hidden from yourself as well. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. But each one is going to be very particular to the individual, and it's going to be precious. It's not going to be a coffee table book. It's going to be something that basically is a record of your dealings, and it's for you. It's for you alone. But at the same time, if someone else does manage to get their grubby mitts on it, you know, there should be what you're going for is a feeling of like, well, this is forbidden. Gag Necronomicons you look at and go, well, it looks like it's forbidden, but come on, check out that cool illustration, right? But it should have that, you know, a true Necronomicon should have that sort of frisson of you know, the outer spaces. You know, the deep core of what it means to be of what it means to be human and what it means to be, you know, a mad human. It's the Black Gnosis on paper.
There you go. And what does the city of Arlay represent in your view?
You know, I've never heard that pronunciation, but I like it a lot.
I think I just botched it because I had to.
But here's the thing: you can't actually botch things that aren't supposed to be, you know, spoken with human vocal apparatus.
That is true. I've heard that too, yes.
There's no way to get it wrong because you'll never get it right. So I like Arlay. That's nice. It trips off the tongue as well. It's one of the few place names to actually, you know, be relatively easy to trip off the tongue. Relay is kind of, for me, you know, it's basically like an anti-memory palace. It has some relation to Kenneth Grant's Tunnels of Set. You're basically looking at sort of the flip side of the Tree of Life, Dathian channels with Relay, but essentially it's a state of the heart. Basically, Relay rises, right? Relay rises in every heart eventually. And when I say anti-memory palace, it's a way to access, you know, through its streets, through its avenues, its non-Euclidean spaces. You're basically accessing the other within yourself. So it's a path working almost. Basically to sink down to relay in a meditative state or in dream. To basically set foot within its boundaries is to basically move through your own self in such a way that you're accessing the stuff that you would never believe was ever you, and yet there it is. You're basically mapping yourself onto its impossible architecture, into it's a very strange map, very strange territory to walk. But you come out the other side, again, with more of the black. You basically come up from relay with more of the Black Gnosis at your core. We're all trying to basically bring it into a more consciously accessed existence. It's part of the cultivation. Walking in relay is part of the cultivation of the Black Gnosis, for sure.
And Scott, what do you see as the lasting legacy or prophecy of Lovecraft to our oh-so-enlightened modern society? I know you, in one part of your book, you talk about somebody coming up to you, somebody very secular, and going, there's nothing scary about Cthulhu. He's just a monster, and you're going, you don't get it.
Well, that certainly has been, that's where it's gone. We now have, in terms of where Lovecraft's mythos has gone, it's been thoroughly commercialized. You can find plush Cthulhus at the toy store. I'm not gonna lie, my kid's got one in her crib right now.
Oh, I love those. Yes.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful. You get these funny iterations of it. You get Summer Fun Cthulhu and Noir Gumshoe Cthulhu, and I don't know what else. But if they can think of it, they've done it. Bobblehead Cthulhu. So yeah, it has basically been made unscary, and it could be argued that we've done that so as to be comfortable with Cthulhu. In terms of what it means for Lovecraft, I don't think that Lovecraft ever prophesied anything in terms of, except that mankind was essentially doomed. he was fond of doom. He really didn't. He was very. I don't know I don't know that you could say Lovecraft was a pessimist, but he didn't have a lot of good feelings towards his fellow humans, at least in the general sense. What is his legacy for our modern society? I don't know. I think it all comes back to that first paragraph in the Call of Cthulhu, where he basically worries that we're going to learn too much. We're going to learn too much. We do make mistakes in our knowledge gathering. Some of them have had terrible consequences. I think his prophecy is that we're basically we're going to screw ourselves, and that certainly this is why Lovecraft has such resonance now, more than he had when he started. Because he was basically an obscure pulp writer until the day he died of malnutrition and cancer back in 36. So this is why he has this sort of really nihilistic view about what we're capable of and where we're going. I don't agree. I think that was a lot of his own fears talking in terms of what he saw for himself. He didn't do well as a person, as a human being. His interactions with others were very awkward. He died young. He died malnourished. He, by all accounts, died relatively unhappy. He was just, he was a writer.
Yeah, no kidding.
Writers are the happiest people in the world. To read some of Lovecraft's biographies is to be like, oh, that's sad. So I think in terms of, I don't think we should necessarily look to Lovecraft the man as, as an exemplar of here's where we're going. But in terms of, how we can approach his legacy and, what sort of truths we can pull from them, because he did unconscious, I think, to a certain degree consciously, but a lot of what makes his work so resonant is that feeling that he was pulling some unconscious truths from the depths of the human experience, which we all have access to. Some occult groups, I think, Kenneth Grant for one, basically, you can find this as a mode of thought with some groups where it's like, well, he was an unconscious priest of the actual great old ones. They're actually out there, and Cthulhu does lie sleeping, somewhere on the floors of the Pacific, despite the fact that we've mapped the whole thing. And guys, he's not down there. Sorry.
Maybe he's hiding in Atlantis or something.
maybe. But yeah, I think there's just there's so much neat and gritty and really challenging material in the fiction, and I think as if we approach it and see how it can be see how we can not make the mistakes his protagonists classically did, and again try to, instead of walling ourselves off from everything that is not us, which is a classic Lovecraftian stance. I've come against the entire universe. I find that it's not interested in me at all. My ego is hurt. I think I'll just go mad now. It's like, basically, well, that's your option. I guess if that works for you. But that's not going to work for a vast majority of people as we move into the future, and we do learn more. The sphere of our knowledge grows ever bigger, but it also reveals that there's that much more darkness. We're going to have to get used to that. It's not going to stop. We're not. It's an open-ended system. We're never actually going to know it all. So I think the lessons we can take from his protagonists and from his life is that it's like that's perhaps not the way to go. We need to become more fluid. We need to become more accepting of our relatively minor place in the universe, and in this way we will survive. And this way, you got to bend like the reed, humanity, as the new information becomes apparent. Because if we remain stiff and unyielding, if we don't allow ourselves access to our dreams, to that which is in us, which is other, then we're gonna get in trouble. And I think we see that in terms of how we're treating the environment, how we're treating each other. The terrible rise in racism and segregation and all kinds of weird and very creepy and unsettling societal stuff that we seem to be dealing with currently. It's just this real worry that certain segments of our society have about interacting with the other. It's dangerous.
I agree with you. I think the point is we're not the center of the universe, and most of what we are is somebody else's meal. So just better accept that and find that little spark of otherness within us, as you said.
That's the first law of the universe. Everybody hungry. It's a terrible law, but once you internalize it makes things somewhat easier.
And Scott, to end, I always ask this to guests who are writers of fiction or just writers in general, and it seems you've hit on a lot of it. But what advice would you have to anyone interested in having a writing career, a semi-career, beyond don't be like Lovecraft, don't be a racist, don't be a nihilist, don't hate women.
But by all means, if that's your thing, and you can make art of it. I'm not one of those sorts who'd be like, gosh, don't make art about uncomfortable subjects. I think that's how we move forward is by making the art. But that's an entire other show, Lovecraft's, racism and what have you. Yeah, he was fairly awful in many aspects, won't deny that at all. How to survive as a writer, how to have a career or a since I don't actually have all that much of a career, I think it would be like, basically a semi career. But what I found, at least in terms of, keeping at it, is, it's cliche, but it's almost impossible to write every day, but do write. It's one of those, it's like drawing or anything else. It is something that you get better at the more you do, as long as you're completely honest with your own output. What you're making. There's always improvement will always happen if you keep doing it. That's pretty much it. Try to get an editor. That's that never hurts. I think one of the best things I ever did was send one of my short stories to Nick Mamatas, who's a sort of one of those. He's definitely he got his start, if you will, with a number of Lovecraftian pieces, and he just takes Lovecraft in very interesting ways. And I sent him a thing that wasn't even Lovecraftian, but he's a brilliant editor, and he was brutal, and I paid for this experience. I gave him some money to, a couple dollars a page, but it was totally worth it because he was able to show me where it was going south, what was cliche, what was trope, what was something he'd seen 50 times before, but just basically to always get that second set of eyes, and make sure it's not somebody who loves you. That makes a world of difference. My writing improved quite a bit from that interaction and others of that kind, where I just realize that the art is an artifact, and artifacts can always be improved. Try not to take it personal. Find an editor and don't take it personal when they edit you.
And don't go crazy, or maybe go crazy.
Go crazy. Nothing is ever permanent. You'll always come out the other side. That's the nature of time. You will eventually come out the other side of it. Changed.
Well, very well said, and I think that's all the time we have today, Scott. So I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing a lot of Lovecraft, a lot of Gnosticism, and a lot of your great book, When the Stars Are Right.
Thanks, Miguel. Had a good time.
Hey there, Cthulhu, down there in your sunken city. You're a billion light years distant, and the stars look very pretty from relay.